Kia ora guys, Michelle here. In this video we're going to cover my post Te Araroa Thru Hike gear list. Now if you've been watching this channel for a little while, you'll know that just before I set out on my attempt to thru hike Te Araroa, I posted a gear list video right here on YouTube. Well, by the time I finished hiking 1800 kilometers of Te Araroa, you can imagine that my gear had changed somewhat. So in this video I'm going to give you a full rundown of the gear that I finished Te Araroa North with, as a bit of an idea, if nothing else, of how a beginner thru hiker can really get their base weight right down to the minimum. Don't forget, the full list of gear that I finished up Te Araroa with is linked in the description down below if you want to check out more detail about the exact gear I used and the weights. So first and foremost, let's talk about the stuff that doesn't count towards your base weight, and that is of course the clothes that I'm wearing. Now this basically did not change for the entire duration of my thru hike. I still finished off wearing this wonderful Columbia PFG button-down shirt, which as you can see got some serious wear and tear and some serious fading from the harsh UV rays. On the bottom I wore this wonderful pair of Kathmandu trailhead hiking shorts for the most part, which I've now been hiking in consistently for about 2 years, and they're still standing up really well. Underneath all of that I wore a set of underwear and a crop top from the brand Runderwear, and they worked out really well. And on my feet I wore a combination of Injinji toe socks, which really helped with my blisters, and then my standard trusty smart wool socks. And if you watched my video that came out last week on the gear that I ditched by the time I finished up Te Araroa, you'll know that I'd switched out my hat to this lovely MacPack, very lightweight bucket cap that I was given by my sister for Christmas. If you've been watching my Te Araroa Thru Hike vlog series, you'll know that by the time I finished up hiking, I was wearing my Keen Tagi boots. As with most thru hikers, once I'd hiked about 1,000 kilometers, I found that I really needed to swap out my footwear. I didn't want to do any long-term damage to my feet or my legs, and I had always planned switching to my boots at some point. So I ended up picking them up on my way through to the Queen Charlotte track. In hindsight though, I wish I'd known how different it was going to be hiking long distances in those particular boots. Even though I've racked up plenty of miles hiking in them on day hikes over the last couple of years, I'd never spent a full day in them before, and I found them super hard on the soles and they rubbed my feet in all the wrong places. I'd also failed to adequately plan for the shoe swap, and instead of packing out some longer socks which came above my ankle in the boots, I carried on wearing my smart wool low cut socks which just didn't protect my ankles. So in short, on all my future long distance hiking trips, I'm going to be sticking with trail runners. If you've been watching this channel for a while, you'll know that my pack of choice for the trail was the Z-Pack's Arc Haul. I did an initial review of this pack before I started the trail, and I will be doing an in-depth 1500 kilometer review shortly here on this channel. I'll be doing full 1500 kilometer reviews of all my big three items a little later on this channel. And if there's a particular piece of gear that you'd like me to review, go ahead and let me know in the comment section down below. I had been experiencing issues with my Arc Haul for a few months before my hike began. For one thing, the torso length was slightly too short for me, and the pack frame was also twisted, which put too much pressure on one of my shoulders. I'll go into more detail about this later, but for now I'd say that I managed to work through these problems on trail without too much hassle, and the pack was even starting to feel comfortable again by the time that I got off the trail. I did notice some of the stitching where the side pockets attached to the pack at the bottom coming undone after only a few hundred kilometers, but it didn't really have too much of an effect on my hike, and I have now sewn them up. As far as my shelter goes, you guys will know that I love and I rant and I rave about my Z-Pack's duplex tent, and this thing I just could not be any happier with. It was like a real home away from home. It weighs basically nothing. I think this entire package with the tent stakes in it is around about 700 grams. In terms of my sleep system, nothing really changed there either. I still ended up finishing with my 10 degree Enlightened Equipment quilt, which I packed down into the Sea to Summit waterproof compression set. That worked out really well for me during the trail. I know I had a lot of comments from people saying that I should basically ditch the stuff sack because it just wasn't worth the extra 100 or 200 grams worth of weight. But I have to say there were one or two occasions where I ended up fully submerging my pack in the water and some water did leak into it, and so if I hadn't have had my sleeping bag in this waterproof compression sack, I probably would have been in a little bit of trouble. So I'm really happy with how this quilt worked. I didn't end up cold at all on the trail and I really enjoyed using it. And for my sleeping pad, again, I still finished up with my Thermarest Neo Air X-Lite sleeping pad, and rolled up inside there, as you can see, is the pump sack that comes with it. What am I saying? The pump sack doesn't come with it, it's sold separately. Again, I've had a lot of comments from people about dropping the pump sack to lose the extra weight, but I have to say I really enjoyed using this, and I really enjoyed the fact of knowing that I wasn't going to be damaging my pad from long-term use by building up the potential mold inside. Now, as far as my Trichology ultralight pillow goes, I really enjoyed using this thing, and I'd say that if you are just a little bit of a light sleeper, you'd really benefit from having one of these inflatable pillows. The only thing that I would say is that when I was going down the Wanganui River, for some reason it just decided to stop working. It just refused to hold air. Luckily for me, Dad was carrying an identical Trichology pillow which actually belongs to Mum, and so when I left him in Wanganui I was able to just take that with me for the remainder of the hike. In the interim period I was actually just using the stuff sack that I was packing my sleeping bag into during the day and filling that with my down jacket and sleeping on that as a pillow. But I have to say that's not really my preference. I do sleep quite cold at night, so I like to have the option of wearing my down jacket in bed with me, so that's not really a long-term option for me. Okay, let's now cover my cook system and water. Now this pretty much didn't change at all during the course of my thru hike. I just made some slight adjustments to the equipment that I had in my cook system, but nothing really major. So I still ended up finishing with my homemade pot cozy. This weighs something like 40 odd grams, and it really did serve that purpose that I wanted to on the trail. It helped me to conserve that little bit extra fuel so I wasn't going through it quite so fast, and it stopped me from having to actually boil and cook my food on my stove. Now it does weigh about 40 grams, which if you're really going for an ultralight base weight is probably going to break your budget, and it was in need of a few repairs along the way. I had to put a little bit more aluminium tape on it because it had basically broken, and I had a little bit of an accident with my burner where I managed to melt some of it at one point along the trail. But apart from that, it really did do a great job. Now obviously packed inside my homemade pot cozy was my Toaks titanium 900ml pot, and again I really couldn't speak any higher of this particular piece of equipment. It weighs basically nothing, and it is the absolute perfect size to boil just about a litre of water, which is really handy if you are like me and you like to have your breakfast or your dinner with a hot cup of tea or coffee at the same time. And speaking of having a hot cup of tea or coffee at the same time, packed down inside this was my Cedar Summit collapsible X mug. I would drink green juices out of it from a little powder mix that I was carrying with me. I'd have my cup of tea in the morning in it, and then I would usually have at least 1 or 2 cups of double strength chamomile tea in it at night time, or a hot chocolate or something like that. As far as I'm concerned, this is an essential piece of hiking gear, and it will definitely be coming with me on future trips. Now packed down inside of that, of course I needed something to actually cook with, and that's where my MSR Pocket Rocket 2 stove came in handy. I really enjoyed this stove while I was out on the trail. Not only is it very, very light, I think it weighs about 63 grams, but it also packs down very, very compact, and I was able to basically stash it inside a little plastic pouch for most of the journey. The only thing that I would say about the MSR Pocket Rocket 2 though, and something that I got a lot of comments on when I was on trail, is how loud it is once it's burning. So in order to get the 2-minute boil time out of it that MSR is very, very proud of, you basically have to open the thing right the way up, and that means creating a lot of noise. So I was a little bit conscious of that, and where possible I tried to make sure that I wasn't cooking very, very early in the morning or very, very late at night. Now obviously to get that stove lit I needed to carry a little bit lighter with me. This is probably their standard size. You can't really get the Bic Minis here in New Zealand, and I think it's basically still entirely full even after 81 days of hiking. Now some other little miscellaneous bits of gear that I carried with me actually inside my cook pot was this little towel here and this designated cooking towel. Now this one here I'm going to talk about first. This is one of the Sea to Summit Airlight towels, and it is absolutely amazing. I picked this thing up in Hamilton on the way past. It weighs basically nothing, it is incredibly absorbent, and it dries very quickly, so it made a very good dish rag. This little towel here actually started out as my dish rag, but turned into just a little bit of an absorbent surface for me to pack my gas canister into, because I found that I was starting to get rust rings around the bottom of my pot when my gas canister was getting wet. In terms of my actual food itself, I carried on carrying all of my food inside this large Z-Packs Cuban fibre food bag, and this thing also was absolutely amazing. It managed to fit up to 6 or 7 days worth of food, and let me tell you, I didn't really figure out how to condense my food bulk down during the entire course of my 81 days hiking. It wasn't without incident though. On my very first day, I sat down to have my lunch, got my cheese and crackers out, got my knife out, put it all down on top of my food bag and cut a massive slit into the food bag. So it's got a little bit of patching up, but aside from that it still functioned really well the entire duration of the hike. Now to eat my food, I carried with me my trusty Toaks titanium long-handled spoon. Super lightweight, super versatile. I didn't find that I needed a fork or a spork at all whilst I was going along, and again probably one of my favourite pieces of gear. Now of course when you're completing a long distance hike you really need to make sure that you've got some form of filtration for your water. Now in New Zealand this is a little bit of a controversial topic. There are a lot of New Zealand hikers and trampers who never ever filter their water, but I'm not a person who wants to take that particular risk. I have a very sensitive stomach and I just don't ever really want to jeopardize my hiking trips by potentially getting some sort of stomach bug. So I carry with me this lovely Soya Squeeze water filter, which is very popular, especially on the long distance trails in America. I found it really excellent. I never found the flow rate to be suffering at all. I did manage to keep it pretty clean as I was making my way down the North Island. I kept it back flushed to make sure that there was no build up of sediment or anything actually inside the filter, and I found that it filtered really well. In fact, I was pretty much filtering water from just about every single supply that I came across, unless it was obviously a town supply. And if I was out in the middle of the bush, I would use this Soya 32-ounce collection pouch to collect my dirty water in, and then screw the filter onto the top, roll it down into my clean water bottle. And for my clean water reservoir, I was carrying with me by the end of the hike this 1.25 litre pump water bottle. Now this is a BPA free water bottle, which is very important to me, and it basically weighs absolutely nothing. Now when I started the hike I was carrying 2 1 litre plastic water bottles with me, and I found that that was a really good amount of water to be carrying at any one time, because often there were longer distances between water stops further north on the North Island. But as you start to get further south you're often walking through forests, or you're basically walking through urban areas anyway, so the need to carry lots and lots of water with you by the time I reached the bottom of the North Island really became not necessary at all. So that's why I basically condensed my water supply down to just 1 bottle. As far as electronics go, I was carrying this small Sea to Summit dry bag full of all my electronic equipment. Because of the fact that I was vlogging my hike along the way, I was carrying a lot more electronic equipment than other hikers would be, and as a result this little bag here weighs about 1 kilo, which is a huge amount. And what's in this bag is not even the sum total of my electronic equipment. So what's in that little bag? Well, first and foremost, any good hiker, even day hikers, should always carry with them a headlamp, and this is my Black Diamond Spot headlamp. Now it carries 3 AAA batteries, and I only had to replace them once during my 1800 kilometer hike. Because of the amount of times I needed to charge my phone and my other recording equipment on the trail, I carried with me this Anker 20,100 milliamp hour battery pack, and with that I carried the charging cable for it. I also needed to charge my phone whilst I was on the trail, so I carried an iPhone charging cable, and if I was in town I made sure that I could connect to the standard supply by using the Signet power delivery wall charger. And if you've been watching my episodes from the trail, you'll know that by the time I finished up in Wellington I was carrying my dad's iPhone 6 as my main form of communication, and the reason for that was because my iPhone 6 Plus ended up taking a dip in the Wanganui River. Now again, if you've watched the original gear list video that I posted before I started my hike, you'll know that I was carrying with me at the start a Joby GorillaPod tripod. Now I had my doubts about that tripod before I started because I had read quite a few reviews saying that often the legs on the tripod would break off. I think I managed to get about 300 or 400 kilometers before the first of my 3 tripod legs broke off, and by the time I had reached Hamilton the thing was basically completely broken. Now because of that, over Christmas I picked up another cheap tripod with flexible legs, but I have to say this thing turned out pretty much useless as well. The head on it is not particularly stable, it wouldn't lock into place, and so whenever I would put my phone in there it would basically just end up falling back like this because the phone was too heavy. So this thing basically got trashed. And for the remainder of my hike down to Wellington I just didn't use a tripod at all. And the final item of gear on the electronics list that I was carrying were my Apple earbuds. These ended up functioning as both a microphone, and also by the time I reached the end of the trail I was actually listening to audiobooks on a regular basis. Now how does one keep oneself from smelling really bad on a thru hike? Well, long story short is you can't. You are always going to smell, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't still carry some toiletries with you, and it's also really important to carry a first aid and repair kit. And I carried all of my toiletries and my first aid and repair kit in this Cedar Summit dry bag. Now my entire toiletries / first aid repair kit dry bag ended up weighing nearly a kilo, and that is far too much, but I have to say I really struggled with culling items from that bag. As any good hiker should, whether they're a thru hiker or a day hiker, you should always carry a decent first aid kit, and this is mine. It weighs in at about 150 grams and it has everything that I need in there. It also includes some repair items. I won't bore you with going through everything that's in here, but basically I have any personal medication that I need, any sort of painkillers like ibuprofen and paracetamol. I have a tube of Voltaren Emugel, which was really good for the pain in my knees, and also an antiseptic cream. Then on top of that, an assortment of antihistamines, plasters, antiseptic wipes, and dehydration sachets. In the back of the pack I was carrying my Thermarest Neo Air pad repair kit, and I also in here had a little roll of duct tape rolled up with a needle stuck in there for emergency repairs. I also carried some floss, which had a double purpose of not just being floss but also potentially being used to sew anything together that needed to be sewn. Alongside that I then also had a separate plastic bag which was just full of my actual toiletry items. So in here I have my toothbrush, my toothpaste, some earplugs for those awful nights where you'd be sleeping in a hut or some other communal facility with hikers that snored. I had some nail clippers, some eyebrow tweezers, a little brush with a mirror attachment which I used every day, and then also some panty liners which are really great to make sure that you don't have to wash your underwear every single day. I also can't stand having any sort of regrowth on my legs or under my arms, so I did carry a very lightweight razor with me. And then as the final item in my first aid kit I was also carrying this small roll of Leukoplast tape, which came in really handy for sorting out some of those blisters and raw patches on my feet by the time I finished up in Wellington. Now if you've been watching this channel for a while, you'll know that one of the biggest things I like to make sure I'm doing is following routines whenever I'm away from my normal everyday life. So on trail I made sure that I was always carrying with me a little bit of soap. This made all the difference to just making me feel better at the end of a long, sweaty, awful day, and also to really get me off on good footing at the start of the day. Now in addition to that, I was also carrying this small little bottle of Dr. Bronner's Castile soap. Now this can be used for pretty much everything. I used it from dishwashing liquid to basically doing laundry with it whenever I hit a town. It can also be used to wash yourself, probably to wash your hair. It just has a bunch of different uses, and I think in future this will be all the soap that I end up carrying. To towel myself down after I'd had a shower, I ended up switching from the concoction of a couple of yellow household dusters that I'd made to picking up one of these in Auckland as I passed through, and this is a larger version of the Cedar Summit Airlight towel that I use for cleaning out my pot. Again, love the thing, it actually got me dry, and I was able to dry my hair with it too, which was a bonus. Now on top of that, I also carried with me my trusty little spray bottle of Natrafarm Stress Med Relief Spray, and this thing, you can tell, was really handy because it is basically empty. I used it every single day. I didn't really have any panic attacks at all on the trail, which was perfect. And a couple of miscellaneous items. So I always make sure to carry with me a survival blanket wherever I'm going, even though this is a little bit heavy. And one of the things that I picked up about 3 or 4 weeks into my hike was a set of pegs. Now these are just standard cloth pegs, but they came in really handy. And because you're only carrying a limited number of underwear and clothing, you really want the opportunity to be able to rinse those out and hang them out to dry at the end of the day. So these came in really handy for that. On the outside of my pack at all times, I was always carrying with me some sunscreen. The sun here in New Zealand is so incredibly strong that you really must make sure you're always applying sunscreen, even though I basically figured out by the end of the trail that was contributing to the heat rash that I suffered with all the way. As far as actually toileting goes, I think I'm pretty standard. I always carried with me a spare roll of toilet paper and my Juice of Spades trowel, although this thing didn't get any use while I was on the trail. Now again, if you know me and you know this channel, you'll know that I had a massive phobia of long drops before I hit the trail. So I always made sure that I had with me a stash of compostable doggy doo bags, and I would just leave it up to your imagination what happened with those. Now, in a separate little plastic bag inside my pack, I was carrying with me my spare set of clothes. That all consisted of basically a spare pair of socks, 2 spare pairs of underwear. I also carried a couple of spare handkerchiefs. I use these instead of using paper tissues, and therefore I made a lot less waste on the trail. I also carried my outdoor research sun gloves. I have to say though, I didn't use these as much as I would have liked to on the trail. I found that they made my hands ridiculously hot, and that basically contributed to the general overheating of my body. I also carried with me a beanie for those really cold nights, and also a set of these Rab Power Stretch gloves, which I only actually wore once on the trail. It just never really got that cold. I slept in this pair of MacPack Pro thermal leggings on the bottom, and then on the top, depending on how cold it was, I also slept in my MacPack long sleeve thermal top. Now even though I took a spare cotton singlet with me on the trail to hike in, I found that I just wasn't really wearing it during the day, and I didn't really want to get it sweaty. So this basically ended up as my sleeping top, which I would wear underneath my Ironman Sugoi long sleeve, basically fleece top. This combination worked really well, and it kept me really warm even during those really cold nights on trail. Once I got back on the trail after leaving to go home for a couple of days, once I'd reached Hamilton, I picked up this pair of bike shorts from home. Now I decided I just wanted something a little bit different to hike in on the bottom, so that I wasn't always wearing my Kathmandu trailhead shorts, and they were really handy, but I also found that I was basically sleeping in them as well. I don't think I'd carry these with me again on the trail though. It was just extra weight, and there wasn't really any need to be carrying them. For my warm insulated jacket, you guys will know because I've done a review on it before, but I was carrying my MacPack Icefall down jacket. Obviously I couldn't have gone without this on the trail. It performed really well. I'm so happy with it, and I'm glad that I spent that extra money to get an 800 fill down jacket instead of the standard 600 or 650 fill, because it really helped to keep me warm on those very borderline cold nights, and there were a few of them. As far as rain gear goes, I finished the trail with exactly the same gear I started with, and that was my MacPack Traverse jacket and my MacPack hightail pants. So before I started, I got a lot of comments from people asking me why I was taking such a heavy waterproof jacket with me, and suggesting that I switch it out for a lighter weight alternative. So my feeling was always that we have much harsher conditions here in New Zealand than you'll find on some of those overseas trails, and I wanted a jacket that I knew would keep me dry an hour after hour of pouring rain, and which would stand up to days and days of hiking through prickly gorse and unmaintained trails. And the Traverse jacket really did that very well. I would only start to feel the damp or cold coming through after many hours hiking in the rain, and towards the end of the trail I was also really glad of its windbreaking properties. So in short, I think I definitely made the right choice with my jacket. As far as my hightail pants go though, they did have a little bit of an incident just north of Whananaki when I went sliding down a hill on literally the first day that I had to wear them on trail, and put a massive slit down the back of them. So they actually ended up finishing the trail heavier than they started because I had to duct tape up the holes in the back. Now it's also really handy to carry with you an extra pair of footwear that you can wear around camp at night time. And you probably remember that I picked up this pair of Crocs sandals before I started the trail. Was really happy with these. I knew that they would be heavy duty. They were incredibly lightweight. They basically weigh nothing, I think about 200 grams. It also turned out to be really handy because by the time I finished up the trail and I was having all those issues with my Keen Targi boots, I was actually starting to hike in these throughout the day as well. Very comfortable, very light, and I'd highly recommend them. Now, I mentioned before there were a couple of times when my pack ended up being submerged in water, and there were also a lot of days on the trail where it just rained consistently all day. So it was really important for me to line my pack to make sure that I was keeping my gear as dry as possible. And I ended up just using a couple of standard bin bags for that purpose. The ones you can get over here in New Zealand are not particularly thick. They're not like the compact bags that you can pick up in the USA, so that's why I ended up double bagging them, but they served as a really good liner to keep most of the water out when you consider the fact that I have a very water resistant pack which has been seam taped. Okay, so I'm now just going to go over the miscellaneous other items that I was carrying. Usually this would either be in my hip belt pocket or just attached to the outside of my pack somewhere. So let's cover first what I usually carried in my hip belt pocket. So usually that would be my phone, my headphones, my microphone. Then I would also carry my buff inside one of my hip belt pockets, and that's because, you know, I would generally use this pretty infrequently actually on the trail, but when I did want to use it, it was always after I'd started hiking, so I didn't want to have to put my pack down and then go rifling through it to try and find it. So I generally just use it to keep the hair out of my face, or on mornings where it was just a little bit chilly and I wanted to keep my ears a little bit warmer. I also carried my Gerber neck knife most of the time in my hip belt pocket rather than actually wearing it around my neck. That was because it's a little bit heavy. It weighs about 140 grams, and just wearing it around my neck became a little bit awkward sometimes. I'd sort of have to attach it to the sternum strap on my pack so that it wasn't swinging forward and backward all the time. Also in my hip belt pocket, by the time I finished the trail, I had managed to cotton on to the idea of carrying a small lightweight shopping bag with me, but I just never factored in when I started the trail the fact that when I got to towns and I needed to resupply with groceries and lunch supplies, that I was going to have to carry them from the supermarket to wherever I was staying at night. New Zealand's a plastic free country now, so we don't have plastic bags or anything to pack all of our groceries in. So I wish I'd thought of this a little bit sooner. By the time I got down to Wellington, I'd finally cottoned onto it, but it's just really handy to have a nice reusable bag for heaps of different uses when you're on the trail. That was a long diatribe on shopping bags. And of course hygiene is super important on the trail, so I always made sure attached to my pack somewhere was this little tube of hand sanitizer. Now of course this has now become like gold, and so it's almost impossible to find, and I liked it because it's got a little lanyard type thing so I can just attach it to my pack. It means it's always handy and I was never scared of just getting it out and using it. And finally, in my hip belt pockets, I always carried my little lip balm here. And this one in particular, which is the Sun lip balm, it has some UV protection in it too, which is really good for that sunshine out here in the New Zealand outdoors. Attached to my pack, I also had my Garmin GPS Map 66i. Again, in hindsight, I'm not sure that I would necessarily go with this particular model again. I thought it might be a good idea, since I wasn't carrying proper maps, to have a backup navigation system in case my phone died and I couldn't use the TA app or Guthook guides. And given the issues that I did have with my phone on the trail, I think that was a really good idea. At the end of the day though, the main reason that I chose this particular model was because of the inReach functionality. Because of my anxiety, I just wanted the peace of mind of knowing that if I had a massive panic attack when I was on my own somewhere that didn't have any cell reception, I could at least send a message to my parents and hopefully I'd be able to calm myself down. From a safety perspective, I also liked Garmin's map share tracking functionality and the breadcrumb trails. So I was able to send a special map link to my friends and family through the GPS so that they could log in at any time to see my exact location. Even though it was a bit more expense to spend, and I probably could have achieved the same thing with a slightly smaller model like the inReach Mini, I really still enjoyed carrying the Garmin GPS Map 66i, and I can see how it would have potential for my hikes in the future. I also carried with me the ACR Rescue Link beacon, which I managed to actually hire from a local outfitter here in my hometown. Now, many people asked why I was carrying both the beacon and the GPS. So with the Garmin GPS Map 66i, I knew that if I had to push the SOS button right here on the side, when it was actually sending that emergency signal, it would basically send it via the USA or a global system, where it would take longer to actually get back to New Zealand search and rescue. Now, it probably in reality is only a matter of a few extra seconds, it could even be as much as a few extra minutes, but I just didn't want to take that risk, so I did decide to carry that ACR Rescue Link beacon as well. I knew that if I pushed the button on that beacon, the signal would go straight to search and rescue services right here in New Zealand, and I'd be able to get that help that I needed a little bit quicker. A couple of other miscellaneous items that I had attached to my pack included this little safety whistle, always good to have some extra safety precautions, and it weighs nothing so it doesn't matter. And then somebody put me onto a really good idea, but I was saying that I didn't have a good system for storing my pack inside my tent at night time. And somebody quite rightly identified that I'm using a duplex and that I'm using my 2 trekking poles to support my duplex tent, and that they have little loops on them. And so what I could actually do is use a little carabiner like this one and attach it to the little strap on the back of my backpack, and then basically hang it through the loops on the trekking poles. And that meant that not only could I store my pack outside the fly doors at night time, but also that it would be lifted up off the ground too. And that came in handy for a number of reasons. Firstly, the ground usually always got wet at night time, so at least I knew my pack wasn't going to be damp in the morning. But secondly, also rodents. Now that's something I'm going to cover in a video a little bit later on this channel, but in New Zealand you always have to be wary about things like possums and rats stealing your food. Now, one piece of gear I carried with me all the way, and I cannot believe that I nearly left it at home before I left, is my Thermarest Z-Seat. I loved using this thing. I literally used it every single day. It was particularly handy if it was a cold day or a wet day where sitting on cold or wet ground was just absolutely miserable. Probably another one of those pieces of gear that I'd say is non-negotiable. And finally, as you guys will know if you've watched these videos previously, I took with me the Cascade Mountain Trek carbon fibre trekking poles on my journey with me. And I am super surprised at how well these stood up, considering they just cost me $45 US. They lasted the entire way. The tips on them are still really good. I was using the rubber tips for a little while until I lost them just before Auckland. The only thing I would say is that the quick lock mechanism on them did start to come undone towards the end of the trail. I'd say probably within the last 400 or 500 kilometers. Now, I could have rectified that really easily just by doing up these little nuts here, but I just got lazy and I didn't really have the tools, so I just put up with the fact that over the course of the day the trekking poles would start shortening on me. The other thing is that the cork grip on one of the handles did start to wear away, and that was a little bit annoying. That started happening very early on. But the other one was perfectly fine, so I think it might just have been a bad batch of cork. But thank you guys so much for tuning in to watch this video on the gear that I finished Te Araroa with. If you've got any comments, feedback or suggestions, I'd be really happy to hear that, so leave it down in the comment section down below. And while you're there, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe, because those two things really do help me to support and grow this channel right here on YouTube. Now next week I have a little surprise for you. We're going to be stepping away from the gear for just a second, but then the week after we're going to come back and I'm going to show you exactly how I packed my pack on the trail. Stay safe and well at home during this time of coronavirus, and I will see you next time.